like we're taking a roll call or anything. So good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Barb, the CEO of PredictiveHire. I'm really pleased to get some time with you this morning. So just a bit of an introduction about myself and why I'm sitting here speaking hopefully pretty passionately about this topic, which is, my background is I'm a bit of a mongrel. I've done lots of different things, but before I was in this job, I was head of HR, first at the Boston Consulting Group, a big professional consulting firm, and then at the REA Group, which is the largest digital company in Australia. And in both of those experiences, what I found was that it wasn't always the greatest, most efficient, most fairest process, the way we did recruitment and promotion. And part of what motivated me to join this team was to figure out, can we do this better? Can we actually bring some heart, some dignity, some respect and some learning, and remove all of the asymmetry that exists in recruitment? I think that's one of the things for me, is that obviously for an organisation, you want to make the best decision, but geez, it takes a lot of courage for someone to apply for a job. And how do you recognise that and acknowledge that and make them feel like it was worth the effort and worth the risk? So I'm going to go through some slides. Happy to have conversations as we go. Don't be shy. There's not a huge number of people on this webinar, feel free to interrupt at any time. So it's been a pretty huge 6 months. I don't need to restate what we all know, but I think it's a great moment in time for HR and for recruitment in terms of the opportunity to really drive change. And we're certainly seeing that organisations are accelerating in terms of the appetite for change, and really the case for change is much greater now. And there's a few things that have really driven that. Obviously, the two enormous generational changes in just a matter of months, COVID and Black Lives Matter. And the impact of COVID is, I was chatting just at the beginning to someone, the most wonderful bias that's been disrupted, that you need to see someone to trust that they're going to do the work. And, I worked in an organisation where I really sponsored flexible working, and the most resistance was at the leadership level, that you couldn't really trust that people were going to do the right thing unless they were visible to you. And fortunately, COVID has disrupted that bias. And now I'm waiting for that other long-held bias to be disrupted, which is that you need to see someone to hire someone. And we in our business obviously passionately believe that that's not the case. The other is obviously Black Lives Matter and the interruption of bias, the awareness that unconscious bias training is not going to make us less biased. And what we need to do is genuinely look at structural change that can interrupt the bias at the top of the funnel for both recruitment and promotion. So, those are two agenda items that are front and centre for HR and obviously also for recruitment. But fundamentally, what is the immediate consequence of this is just the sheer number of people that are displaced, that are looking for work. And, the reality of that, in Europe, you've got about 27% of the workforce whose jobs are at risk. In America, 26 million people filed for unemployment in 1 month, and that number's just growing. In Australia, an extra 1.4 million Aussies are out of work. And a big chunk of those, not just in Australia but elsewhere, are young people, and also older people that may not ever get back into the workforce. For those of you who are from South Africa, we also worked with businesses over there. You've got 350,000 newly unemployed just in the first quarter, and a really extraordinary unemployment rate forecast of 35%. I think the rest of the world is more like early single digits, but a third of the population being unemployed is just enormous in terms of a challenge. And for that reason, really, if not anything else, it's how do you create a candidate experience that's going to humanise and dignify what all of those job seekers are going through. And the reality is that the governments can't create demand fast enough to supply opportunities for them. So how do you make sure that as they go through that, you do that respectfully, efficiently? And I'm going to suggest a few other aspects to the way you recruit that really change the experience for candidates. So, we really think that now's the time to hire with heart. But if that doesn't appeal to you, the other way to really drive this business case in your organisation is looking at the financial impact of having a recruitment process that isn't candidate friendly and candidate respectful. And there's a huge amount of business trade-offs that are being made if you're not doing that. And I think only now organisations are starting to recognise the linkages between candidate experience and what that means to the business in terms of your customer base. If any of you work for consumer brands or also businesses that do a lot of grad recruitment, that's a pool of talent that you want to retain through your process. The reality is that every candidate for consumer brands is probably also a consumer. And the last thing you want is to compromise that as you take them through a recruitment process. So what we're seeing is it's not just recruiters who want to do the right thing to give candidates a good experience, it's actually the business really demanding that happens. And that's because the stats are in. There's a lot of research that looks at this from different lenses. In the UK, 1 in 4 British job seekers will stop purchasing or will purchase less from a brand if they've had a negative candidate experience. 29% of job seekers would consider becoming a customer of a brand if they had a positive candidate experience. So it goes both ways, which is the good news. And one business that a few years ago actually costed this out in a very forensic way is Virgin Media. And they looked at, for all of those candidates who applied on an annual basis, this is now a good 6 years ago, and you would expect that these costs in terms of loss to the businesses would it be even greater now given the volumes, is they would lose around 7,500 from a poor candidate experience, which equates to the equivalent of $5 million annually. So, it actually starts to have measurable impact on the bottom line when the HR team is not cognizant of what that experience looks like from a business perspective. So what do? How do you bring some love into the candidate experience to meet both the need to dignify that at a time when there's a lot of job seekers, but also to support what the business needs to make sure you don't lose those consumers along the way? So I have to put this up because I do love The Office, and I think it's a bit counterintuitive to imagine Ricky Gervais as the person, the go-to person to help inspire us about love and love in the recruitment process. But let me just explain why, because I think there's a real call to action for recruitment to look at when you consider other experiences that we have as consumers, all of us. When we go to a bank today and we're looking to seek a loan, if you start to think about, well, what if recruitment was running that experience? What would that look like? And it would look something like this. You would go in to meet with someone like that, a Ricky Gervais character. You would sit there for half a day and he would challenge you with all sorts of questions about, tell us about a time, the last time that you borrowed money and did you pay that back? And let me kind of check you out and see whether or not I think you're going to be a good bet, are you a good risk or not? Because when you think about it, what you're doing in recruitment around hiring is you're making decisions about risk. You're delegated by the business to decide on whether this person is going to be the right person for the business. And it is ultimately a decision around risk. Much the same as when you're making a decision to lend someone money, it's a decision around risk. And in a banking situation, there's no way that they would bring you in as a home loan seeker and make you sit across the table and answer questions. They wouldn't then invite, half the bank branch to sit around the table and have a coffee chat to see whether or not you're a great culture fit. They would lose your business pretty quickly. Instead, what we have is we have this experience where we go online, we can compare and contrast, at night while we're sitting on the couch. It's a very intuitive, very UX friendly experience, and we get immediate results. And we don't need to talk to a person, and that's okay because we're satiating a need. We're getting what we need, and we're getting it at a time that's really convenient for us. And I think when you start to look at how do other functions, and we don't normally look to Ricky Gervais or banks as a signpost of what great looks like, but reality is they've done a brilliant job of identifying and measuring risk in a very dynamic way, in a very accurate way that creates a far better experience for the consumer. And that's really, I think, the kind of benchmarks that recruitment should be thinking about. How do we operate like banks in terms of the efficiency, the speed, the objectivity with which we make those decisions? So there's a number of ways that I would suggest to really look at your candidate experience, to really figure out whether or not you're doing it in such a way that is both dignifying, but also going to deliver, happier consumers at the end of the day. The first is, what's the formula that you're using? And I'm going to assume here that in a world of 5 times, 10 times, 100 times more applicants, you're definitely not going to be interviewing them face to face. And there's a few other reasons why I think that's not a good idea, both for you, your organisation, and the individual, which I'll come to a little bit later. But ultimately, you know, this is a relationship that you're building right from the outset. And what do you want the beginning of that relationship to be? Do you want it to be that you're playing a game, that you're making someone talk into a video, that you're doing some kind of other assessment that doesn't quite feel relatable, that you'd rather have your 16-year-old son do? You know, it's really important that these experiences feel human and intuitive and relatable to people. So I think the first thing is to really consider, how are you engaging with them? How are you assessing them? What does that formula look like? We happen to use chat, and we use chat because we all use chat. You know, we live with our phones. Some of us sleep with our phones. Everyone has a phone. The open rates on text are about 90% plus. On email, they're 18%. So if you really want to reach people and you want to reach them in a way that is convenient to them and natural to them, have a conversation, you know, and reality is that great conversations can lead to great people. So think about the vehicle or the formula that you're using to reach them. The other one is that, you know, okay, there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of people out there who are looking for jobs, but that's an opportunity for you, because you've now got this enormous pool of talent way beyond even just your local zone, you know, at a global level to source for talent. And why not interview the world? And, you know, I go back to this episode that Oprah ran quite a while ago now, where she created the expectation to everyone who came into the audience, you know, one person is going to get a car. One of you lucky people is going to get a car. And at the end of the episode, she yelled out and she said, "You get a car, you get a car, you get a car." And everyone looked underneath their chair and everyone had a set of car keys. And it was just so completely disruptive to what the expectation was. And, you know, that's what recruitment ought to be, is that everyone gets an interview, everyone gets a fair go. And that works for the candidate because they feel like they've had a chance to share their story, but also it works for you because you then get the very best chance of what is, you know, quite extraordinary amount of unemployment right now. The other piece that is, I think, increasingly important that I feel recruitment really needs to sort of move much faster on, excuse the pun, is speed. So, you know, all of these are services that we all know, right? Some of them we use, some of them we might not use, but basically it's about immediacy. We all have an expectation now as consumers that when you want something, you get it, whether we think that's a good thing or not. That immediate satiation of our needs is a reality. And why shouldn't it be the case with getting a job? And for people who are out of a job, actually it really makes a big difference whether they get a job today or 3 weeks. So the practice of taking a week or 3 weeks to get back to someone looking for a job. Okay, if it's a CEO gig, I get that. But for any other role, really, why shouldn't we set an expectation that it's within 24 hours that you get back to the person about whether they get the job or not? And so I think there's a real opportunity to massively accelerate the speed with which the teams are making decisions. And obviously that's where technology is really the enabler. But also the obligation, almost like an SLA, to get back to candidates within 24 hours. And I think, you know, when you look around the market, there are few companies that are doing this. So you can quite readily differentiate your brand by just committing to a few things that will really set you apart from every other business, that you'll get back fast, you'll get back with something really valuable, and you'll make it an experience that's really human and accessible. You know, it's a great opportunity to really differentiate your brand pretty easily at this time. Let's put ourselves in the candidate's shoes. And, you know, it's a pretty dire situation right now. There's a pretty interesting blog. I'll just show it to you. That is a guy who's an Aussie, but he's got quite a global reach, called Steve Gard. He'll love me for mentioning him. Who put out this probably about a month ago now, and he said, right, what's the expectation that candidates have about who gets back to them, when you get back to them, and with what, you know, what's the minimum expectation? And I think what's interesting here is, you know, you've got almost half the people who responded. He had 246 votes, but prior to that, he had something like 80,000 views on the whole question of what's the commitment we make to the candidate about speed and what kind of response we share with them. And I think it's pretty unacceptable to have a template decision email at 43%, right? Because that doesn't feel like anything. You're just getting another rejection. And, you know, the opportunity to personalize that and to make it something that you as an individual learn from, that can help you get your next job, that can help you understand yourself better, work better within your next team, within your next organization. Like, that is such a powerful gift to give to people at this time. So, aspire to do more than just send back an email within 24 hours. Aspire to really motivate and lift the person on the other end. Just to share with you, we obviously do that in our tech. We have pretty unique science that allows us to really discover your personality from your 5 questions that you respond to. And, we never used to do this, interestingly, in the first year or so of operating. And clients were very nervous about it, the idea of giving automated, personalized feedback. They thought that it was indicating buyer behavior, that they were going to get called up by all these candidates saying, why didn't I get the job? But actually, it's the opposite. Firstly, they don't call because they've had something. They've had something that was useful to them, that was personal to them. And moreover, the impact on their brand has been extraordinary. Most of our leads actually come from rejected candidates, would you believe? So, the chance to really help people and motivate them at this time, I think, is so empowering to the organization and to you. And you cannot do that as a human being. 1, you're not going to know them well enough. And 2, you're clearly not going to have the bandwidth to be able to do that. So this is where technology can be a fantastic co-pilot to you in your recruitment. One of the things we invite people to give feedback to us on is, does this help you? How does this help you? Does it help you sell yourself in an interview? And, you can see here some of the data that people share. So, imagine if your CEO can go out and say, look, we've only got so many jobs, but, we want to be able to help everyone that applies for a job. Like, that's such a powerful message from a branding perspective, let alone from a recruitment perspective. So I'm going to challenge you, because probably everyone's thinking nothing can be better than a human. And if you use machines, if you use AI, it's just naturally going to dehumanize the experience. So I'm going to bust some myths here about AI, because I'm obviously talking about artificial intelligence here being used as a key enabler to this experience. And I'm sure all of you have heard about the experience of Amazon, who tested but never deployed, just to their defense, a tool which built a predictive model based off CVs. So they had millions of CVs of people who had applied and the people who'd been hired. And they said, okay, well, if we can just sort of codify the DNA in the CVs of all those who've been hired, that's awesome. We just apply that and everyone gets assessed against that. The problem is that when you use CV data, you're using pretty flawed data. For one, I could write a CV that says anything and you wouldn't know any better. 2, a CV doesn't really give you much insight into the character of a person, who someone is. And so really what it's going to give you is stuff that's quite genderized, stuff that's potentially open to bias, like where you went to school. What you really want is to use AI and technology that's what we call clean or blind. It's not based on an existing data set that by its very design has biased information in it. And, when you find that, reality is it is better than us, and I think people still find that really confronting, but we have so many biases as humans. If you look at Wikipedia, there's something like 134 different biases that exist that have been identified. And most of those, I couldn't name for you and we wouldn't be aware of. And that's the whole challenge, is we come with positive intent. We want to look at someone purely for their potential, but unfortunately, we have fair few unconscious bias that really flavors our thinking, that it's very hard for us to check in the moment. And, I'm looking at this video of myself speaking now, and video is, I think really potentially a petri dish for bias, because it's extremely hard to remove what you're seeing visually from what you're thinking about that person. So, really try and discover and see, can you find tools that are truly blind? For those who are Australian, this is something that came out relatively recently about, again, it's implicit bias. It's not saying we're all bad people and we're not wanting to hire for diversity, but we just don't realize that we've got that. And so that's why you have to have something that is truly, a beginner's mind, rather than a human mind that's been, pregnated with a lot of assumptions over our years, right at the top of the funnel, to ensure that you give everyone a fair go and you create that opportunity for inclusiveness. I think, the key thing I want to say around AI, and there's many different types of tools that are built using different types of data, is with the right data, the difference between using technology that's based in data versus us as humans is you can test it. You can sanitize it, you can track it, you can measure it, you can actually see what's going on. And, you know, that's the really difficult thing with having only people involved in that process is if you're someone who's a head of HR and you've really tried to shift mindsets, you can't do that. You can't enable change in the way people see a problem unless you bring data. You know, talk to your CFO or your CEO, and what they'll say to you when you're looking to put a business case about anything is you've got to present the data case. And, you know, it's the same with bias, is that people don't think that they're biased and they can't see the bias. So really look for those tools that allow you to measure it and share it around the organisation to start those conversations about where the bias must be going on. So where all this comes back to, you know, if we think about candidate experience, I encourage you to think about it from the perspective of it's a relationship. And like any relationship, trust starts early, and it doesn't take much for trust really to be eroded. And so how do you make sure across the whole journey of that candidate experience that you're building trust, you know, and you're amplifying and growing trust so that, one, you keep them along the journey, because if you are a consumer brand, that really matters, that they stay the course because they're valuing the experience. The other is if they're great talent, you want to get them. You know, the last thing you want is to put in effort to move people through a pipeline and then lose them. And also because in a world of social media, we all know that if someone has a great experience, they'll tell, you know, all their friends and family about it. So it's actually quite a cost-effective way to build a great brand. And one way that I also think is good for recruitment to quantify the value of a great candidate experience is think about if you get 100,000 applicants a year or even 10,000, what would it cost your marketing department to build a strong relationship, awareness, a trusted relationship with 10,000 or 100,000 consumers? It would probably cost millions of dollars. And you can do that just by what you do in your recruitment. So you have such power as recruiters to much more cost effectively create fantastic consumer love. Thanks, Laura, through you know, how you build trust. And so what I would say are the elements to trust. It's a function of firstly using a really intuitive and human experience, you know, something that people can feel is comfortable to them, relatable to them. Make it inclusive, you know, so something that everyone can do, as opposed to those scary psychometric tests that I never want to do ever again. Fast, it's got to be fast for people. People need jobs, people deserve to hear back quickly. Obviously, fairness is critical, and fairness comes from everyone being assessed in the same way, you know, and when you have 50, 100 different hiring managers doing the interviewing, they're all going to bring their own perspective and their own questions. That's not a great recipe for fairness and good calibrated decision making. Obviously, you want it to be blind, you know, in a world of people really looking to whether organisations are matching all that rhetoric around Black Lives Matter with reality. You know, that's where you have to measure up really and look at your processes and say, is our process truly blind? It's got to be data-driven versus gut feel, you know, think about those key relationships in our life, who we partner with and who we work with, and you know, we'd all be better off by having more data to guide us in those decisions. And feedback, like giving people feedback, is just such a gift at this time to help them, and obviously also makes a difference for your brand. So that's my recipe, my suggestions for how to think about hiring with heart and why it's so important right now. And really thank you for your time. We'd love to have any conversations, engage in any questions right now if people want to have a bit of a conversation around this. Who would like to go first? Just seeing if Jeff, you're on the call. Hi, Jeff. Someone I know. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. Maybe, I don't know, do you want to share why candidate experience is important to you at Iceland?
Yeah, absolutely fine. I was given the opportunity for everyone else to speak rather than suddenly jumping on your bandwagon, Barb. So
I volunteered you to kick it off.
Just for everyone on the call now, just to let you know that at Iceland Foods we have started working with PredictiveHire, and that was as a result of a couple of things really. One was the element of the mass recruitment that we were doing. Just to put it in perspective, already this year we've received, well, in the first 4 months of this year, we received over 500,000 applications, and we wanted to get a way that really delivered a level of fairness, that delivered a level of consistency around how do we actually sift those applications that then enable the store managers to reduce that amount of time that they're actually spending on doing the recruitment. The other thing that we wanted to do was significantly enhance our candidate experience. And one of the whole challenges that I had around the experiences that we had within the business was it felt like it was really standard. It felt like it was cold. It felt like it came from a computer. And we wanted to change the way in which we did that. And more importantly, give something back to the candidates. So often nowadays, people apply for jobs and there's the bulk standard response that says, if you haven't heard anything from us in 2 weeks' time, take it that you haven't been successful. Well, actually, you know, what we have a duty to do as certainly big companies or companies of any size really is to help those individuals to understand why they haven't been successful, and to help them to be successful in the next role that they should apply for. And, you know, the fact that that won't be for your business is probably the right decision, because they wouldn't have been the right fit given the testing that they've gone through or whatever. But that doesn't mean that they're a bad individual. And what we need to do is we need to help them to understand where their strengths are and where their development needs are. And certainly for us, you know, that was a massive appeal with PredictiveHire. And going through and just reading some of the feedback that we've had from the candidates, it's having a huge effect on the candidate experience. And I just had a very quick look at our figures with PredictiveHire, and we have got a 100% positive experience from our candidates. And bearing in mind, 49,000 candidates have gone through PredictiveHire. To have that figure is a superb figure. And you know, we are genuinely really chuffed about how they are engaging far more with us as a brand, and how they are feeling that they're getting something back, and they genuinely don't feel like this is a computer process in any way whatsoever. They genuinely feel like they're talking to people. So yeah, that's my initial views about it, Bob.
I really didn't expect you to be on the call, so thanks, Jeff. That's very kind of you.
That's all right. That's all right.
Great. Anyone else with thoughts or experiences to share? I feel like calling out Jennifer because she outed herself as an Aussie in London, but maybe that's a bit unfair.
Oh, don't pick on Jennifer. I've got a bit of a query for you, Barb. I thought that was really interesting. Working away in the background with Ricky Gervais on my screen as well prompted a couple of strange looks from my wife. But I'm interested in people's viewpoints around how important the employer voice is within communications, particularly around automated communications. We're not going to be dealing with a person in all eventualities. I think everybody has to acknowledge the fact that when you're dealing, particularly with the amount of applicants Jeff is dealing with, that you can't speak to them all. It's just not going to happen. So there's going to be some form of automation in there. About how important it is for when setting that up to have a really good idea of the culture that you're trying to build within the business and how you want to come over within that communication.
So I'll just share how we do it, and maybe others can share, you know, how they've gone about that. So I completely agree, because again, this is a relationship, and you want to get a real sense of who that company is and what, and you know, whether you're graduates or even particularly at times like this, we're seeing people really care about the values of an organisation. And I also know from my past experience in HR, my CEO would challenge me to say, we've just evolved our values. How are we going to embed them in our decision making? Because they don't mean anything if they're on a wall. They really need to be visible and embedded within all of our key decisions like promotions and recruitment. And so the way we do that through chat is it's a highly personalized experience for the client. So it can include career videos, which can be different by role, by time of year, if you're doing seasonal recruitment. So you can really talk directly to the individual. You can also use whatever messaging you want up front to, contextualize the role. Because it's also language, natural language, not sort of weird games, you can use your language and your values. And so one of the things we do is we sit down with the business in advance and say, how do you describe success? Like, what language do you use to talk about your people? Do you use team or people or crew? Or, with Qantas, we did a lot of work around what their voice was, because they're incredibly invested in their brand. They're one of the most trusted brands in Australia, probably in the world. And so that ability to really mirror your voice, both through the collateral, but also through the language, I think is really critical. And people really respond to that. It's interesting. There's some prospects I speak to. I was speaking to one last night in the UK financial institution, and they just can't seem to imagine that AI can be human. But actually what people say, and Jeff would have seen this in the feedback, is, everyone kind of knows and expects now that there's AI involved, right? It's just the reality of today. And as long as the experience feels kind of comfortable and easy and relatable, and they get something back, it really changes their perception. If you're forcing them to talk to an avatar or something that sounds like a robot, it's jarring. It doesn't feel as natural. So we try and mirror the actual interview experience as much as possible.
What I would say, just to back that up where Barb is concerned, probably, and we had a very quick implementation plan, didn't we, Barb, in terms of this? But probably one of the lengthiest parts of it was about actually getting the questions right and getting the language right. And we really did spend a decent period of time to do that. And I've just had a quick look at one of the pieces of feedback here, and this is completely unedited. I enjoyed the interview. It makes me believe Iceland as a company are people carers, and their staff are more than just employees. And that's what's coming over from the way in which we put the language across within the questions and that sort of thing. So, and there are a number of different ones that talk about the Iceland culture, and that's just from the questions that they've been asked.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other thought prompters, challenges that people are grappling with right now in this space, or things to share? I'll just put one thought out there, which is, we're working with a big UK business that I can't mention yet, but they're looking at how do they design the world's most inclusive recruitment process. It's in the professional services space, and that I love that aspiration. And for businesses that really need to do something about bias, if you think, I don't know if there's anyone from Amazon here or Netflix or those kinds of really big brands that now need to show that they can't just put stuff out on Instagram. They really need to change the way they do things internally. And I think that's got me thinking, because it's not just about what we offer in the technology, but there are so many different steps along the way where you have to really question yourself and say, is this going to work for all the different types of people that we genuinely want to attract? And this is clearly not feasible in the Iceland space, but one thing that we did in a job 2 jobs ago for me is we really needed to get more women to want to work in this particular job. It was in the consulting environment, and we ended up giving every female who was offered an interview a buddy, and that buddy would call them in advance to really make them feel comfortable about going through the process, because the expectation or the perception was that it wasn't that female friendly, and it was a bit intimidating and so on. And it just made me think about all the multitude of steps that exist end to end. Like, are you putting up one ad Are you putting up multiple ads? Are you putting it up on one site or multiple sites? Is it, you know, are you using one pro forma, or are you actually recognizing that different people will respond to different messages? So, you know, I think like we have so much personalization in our life we take for granted. You know, our Netflix feed is our feed, our Facebook feed is our feed, you know, is how do we personalize recruitment? And, you know, we think with where we are right now, we're able to certainly personalize the experience for you as an applicant because of this learning that you get back that's yours, that just reveals who you are, that really works for you. But I think there's such a potential in HR to look beyond that functionality and go, where else can you really personalize? And, you know, ultimately, I think personalization is what's necessary to really create inclusiveness, because otherwise you're trying to apply one model to, you know, a very diverse group of talent. So I don't know whether that's something people are thinking about, but that's sort of a space that we're starting to get into, is how do you create more personalization along the journey to really ensure that you're inclusive of all the different types of people out there. Any other thoughts or questions? No, I'm thinking if you're still on, then maybe you're still curious about something. So don't be shy. Feel free to post something in the chat channel.
Oh, I think that's me. Thank you very much, Barb. Take care. That was really enlightening. Thanks for that.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, folks. Well, if you want to contact me afterwards, please do. Feel free to have a chat, you know, an email, or I actually didn't put my email, but you can certainly find me on LinkedIn, and hope you got some value out of it, and all the best for this time and all the best with your recruitment for 2020. Thanks, everyone. Oh, thanks for doing that, Laura.
No worries. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.